Pedro, Mariana, and Marina. We're using the Parthenon as case study 1. This is because of its role at the present, not in the past. It's classical Greek architecture. We all know it.
And the other case study we're getting is CCTV, because it's a building which links to lots of social things. It's not strictly architecture, but it's happening. It is there for a reason, and because it is there, lots of things that will be linked with it. So this is case study 2.
We're reading the Parthenon as a symbol, not because it represents stereotypes of Western architecture, because it's a stereotype of Western architecture, and it's in the Occident group. We're able to create clear boundaries between Occident and Orient, and this clearly stands at the Occident bracket. But it's actually, bits of it are used and repeated in bad architecture over the world to kind of recreate the kind of Occident bracket, but it only truly works in the Parthenon's case because it's so old in its age. But it's quite a conscious thing to maintain it and stop kind of Orientalism ultimately happening. You can see badly being repeated, but this is only like truly unaffected by Orientalism. These will have kind of Orientalism aspects affecting it, whether it's the architect or the location. And you can see how it's a lot of effort has gone into preserving it, and kind of the test of time doesn't. They want to keep it in the Occident bracket.
And the other case study, it's really interesting because it's a state TV headquarters in a socialist dictatorship. So it is a building which at the same time represents the strong and the force of a Chinese government because of its cantilever in an earthquake area and its symbol. So at the same time it is a symbol of the force of the government, but it's also a symbol of the openings the government has been making, because it is opening itself to capitalism. So it is a major media building. So, and media is one of the main things to a democratic country. So it really represents lots of changes in the Chinese imaginary and in Chinese icons and in the idea of what is Beijing. So the idea is that not only it is a symbol because it is one of the most important of the 21st century buildings, but the things which happen in it will also relate and form and mediate the way in which social is a symbol in China. And that's why OMA chose to do this building, because it gave up on the 9/11. It is because it has an importance which goes beyond the field of architecture and acts in other fields. So, but that's not our only interest in this case, but it's the group of architectural possibilities that allowed it to happen. And here we have a sentence from one of OMA partners, which says, Beijing lacks a strong contemporary icon, identifying itself instead with the visually elusive forbidden city. So this represents really a set of intentions of Beijing government, which is we don't want our icons and our city to be recognized for our history. We no longer want that. We want our city to be recognized by its new contemporary icons. And this links not only to a symbol of the social, but to Orientalism, because when we get to the point where Beijing's major icon is being made by an architect which is the most internationally known architect, it says a lot about what are our ideas of Orient.
Yeah, the case studies, though completely different in size, time, and location, act both as formal and political symbols, interacting in the assembling of the social in the contemporary world. Either building gains a sense of importance only through the prism of history. Parthenon, as an enduring symbol of Athenian democracy and Western civilization, would be nothing without its historic background. While in China, CCTV, the socialism in China with all its implications, made CCTV gain a sense of importance. The idea of group making and social permanence, not as a rule, but as the result of an intensive effort to do so, which Latour talks about in his text, is relevant to, in both cases, question the architectural role in the assembling of the social. This image we have there is a drawing that represents how CCTV is becoming a new icon, a new symbol for the Chinese society.
The links between the cities in which the case studies are placed we thought about them using the main concepts from the text, both the Said and the Latour text, which are Orientalism as a man-made view from the Orient by the West civilization, and also the social as a sort of a group of elements that relate to a particular group and time and place. And this has to do brought the question of how to deal with the conflict between modernization and preservation in both cities, and how they deal with iconical architecture. And we noticed that in both cases we have really opposite ways of dealing with the iconical architecture. While in Athens, we got urban planning and legislation that works to preserve the icons. So as we can see in this image, we got first the Parthenon, which is constantly being maintained and conserved. We have also sort of a urban planning that protects itself from its surroundings. So we got controlled heights of buildings and things like that. And on the other hand, we got Beijing that has in its own municipal commission of urban planning. It doesn't state a mission through historical preservation. Its missions are more towards making the city a more dynamical place for economical growth. So this has to do with how the Forbidden City, for instance, which is an icon for Chinese typical architecture, and its surrounding is it's more not as preserved as in the Acropolis case, since the vernacular architecture that is around it, it's sort of slowly disappearing, taking place by a contemporary one. In the same time, we've got economical aspects reinforcing this opposite perspective towards modernization and conservation, while in Beijing, which is the city, which is part of China's economical growth, we got a landscape that's revealed sort of a symbol of this economical growth, is revealing China's development. We got Athens, and its architecture, which is much more conservatory and still in time, with its changes are much more controlled. We have Athens is part of an economical crisis that also relates to stability and not actually development, which is part of the crisis in Europe as in general. And this also relates to the political aspect. While in China we got socialism, it's more like an authoritarian regime, which would more like an authoritarian regime. We got a more changing landscape. And then we got in Athens, which is a democracy that we supposed to be sort of a more free environment, but it's the free environment in the political change, the political aspect has the most conservatory one in the landscape. China is the other way around. We got like a more conservatory aspect in the political field, but a more free environment for like the landscape changes, and this has to do with the government owning like around 60, according to our sources that are on the references by the end of the presentation. We got the government being owning about 60% of the city center like sites, which allows it to like change and do whatever it wants with to it, and it has a reaction to people to like people react to it differently than they do in Athens, and that's it.
So the history of the city is what really links them, and they're linked by their past, but not really by the future. They're kind of heading in opposite directions at the moment. In Athens, they're really big on preservation, preserving the history and the Oxton bracket. And they want to, they try and reconstruct and preserve it. They want history to play a big role in what their future is. Whereas in Beijing, they want change, and they want that they want social change, and they're doing it through architecture, through buildings such as CCTV.
And this is basically two images that represent what are the city's actual concerns by now. So this is CCTV, which is a building that intends to be a new symbol of China and of Beijing. So how China wants to remake itself as a contemporary country and Beijing as a contemporary city. And on the other way, we have the new Acropolis Museum by Bernard, which is a contemporary building, of course, but a contemporary building whose main role is to revive and to renew and to keep those symbols and those totems of Western and of Greek architecture.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of a place where they preserve all the artifacts and the old work and the architecture that was produced.
And even the architectural aspects of the museum reinforce the Western architecture.
It's not really about the actual building, it's more what the building does and what the building houses.
Both cities are symbolic, but Beijing is symbolical not only in the historical aspect, but in the contemporary one, like economically, culturally, etc. So it tends to change faster than Athens, and that makes it hold on to its historical aspect as a way to be recognized on the global community, maintaining Western expectations, Western stereotypes and models. The group recommendation. The group recommendation to the cities, based on our previous analysis, relates to the radical approach both cities have to their role as cities of history, but in opposite ways. Athens uses urban planning as a tool to protect their history, making it difficult for the city to transform too much and possibly change its image, gaining another meaning other than its historical one, which means that in a global scale it will always be referenced for one thing. Projects for the Center of Revival, such as Rethink Athens, which is a new urban planning for the city center, reinforces the recent need for changes in the way the city relates to history. The project claims that it will help reverse the climate of social and financial decline and restore the many vacant buildings back into activity, revitalizing towards the most central parts of the city. The need for Athens to reinvent itself mirrors Beijing's necessity to look into its older symbols and weight practically and theoretically the value given to its history. What happens to Orientalism if the symbols that compose what it means to be Oriental start to disappear?
So these are some implications and some views we have about the future of the cities, which are really pessimistic ones, not necessarily the right, but the outcome of our research. And the question we bring is, what would happen with Athens if it went into a huge economic growth. So are all cities which go into a discontrolled economic growth forgets their symbols and their history? So is Athens doomed to be a contemporary and a generic city in the sense of its effort to be better economically, implying to forgetting those icons? And what would happen also with Beijing if it went into an economical crisis or a recession? How can you stabilize a city which no longer is growing, but also can no longer rely on its historical symbols because it has replaced them, and its historical symbols don't mean that much in the assembling of their social experience?
And some of the discussions.
We brought in as a group is, will city symbols be associated with contemporary architecture instead of a historical one? How can these two icons relate in the urban environment? How can historical and contemporary?
Also, it's the bridge between Orient and Occident, and in fact, in the Oriental text they touch on it as well. What happens if you have a Western architecture with a preconception of Orientalism building in the East? Does it change Orientalism, or is it just imitation or kind of a bad way of design?
And what is architecture role in maintaining of memory in the cities of history? And what is architecture role in changing? And the other question is, what are the boundaries of Oriental versus Occidental in the globalized world, since all the buildings both in East and West are made by internationally known architects? So what I think is these boundaries tend to blur a lot. I don't think they will disappear, but they will blur a lot more than they were blurred before. And it's interesting to see how architecture has a role in social development. At the same time, architecture is a consequence and a cause of a social development, and I think that is really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It is good.